Welcome to Formation Time, day 27. Today, we're looking at Mark, the way of courage. Why is Mark the gospel of courage? Well, in some ways, Mark is the scariest gospel. It's the fastest, it's the most intense, it's the shortest. There are demons all over the place. Jesus is healing people. It ends with an empty tomb. But the original Mark, the original manuscripts, didn't even have a resurrection story. Mark ends with a call to hope, even when we don't see. Mark is in some ways the most straightforward gut punch of a gospel. Mark shows us a Jesus who is the suffering servant, a Jesus who needed to be a man of courage. A Jesus who was the Son of God, but who also knew that he was going to suffer. And Mark, scholars argue, was written to a group of people who were suffering greatly. Some scholars believe that Mark was written to suffering Christians living in Rome under the persecution of the Roman Empire. Mark is a call to walk in the way of the cross, to endure suffering and pain with something like joy. And so Mark, the way of courage, challenges us that sometimes following Jesus is dark. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes the cross is all that we can see. But there is a promise, the promise of the empty tomb. So Mark invites us into the shoes of those who are suffering under the oppression of Rome. He invites us into failure and hope. And most of all, to take courage, because this is a gospel. This is the good news of Jesus. And if we want to be formed in the way of courage, if we want to be transformed to be people who have less fear, we can find ourselves in the boat with Jesus, calming the storm. We can see ourselves at the foot of the cross and outside of the empty tomb. To be formed in the way of courage, we need stories like the Gospel of Mark that are true, that are real, and that sometimes, to be honest, are a bit dark. So what can we take from this today? We all have hard things in our lives. We all need courage to face our fears. And God has not given us a spirit of fear. God has given us a power of sound mind, of courage. He's given us the Holy Spirit to comfort us and walk with us. He said the most common command in the Bible, fear not. Why? Fear not. Why? I am with you. Being with Jesus, following Jesus, is the way of courage. It's the way to be transformed into a person and into communities of courage. Jesus was the most courageous person who ever lived. He stared down death, hell, and the devil, and he won. But he won by the way of the cross. So let's take a few moments to think about that, to think about what Mark has to say to us, to think about the way of courage. I know that life can be dark sometimes, and taking a few minutes to think about the courage that we need to overcome failure and to hope in what God has in the future for new life, that's time worth taking. So today, we looked at Mark, the way of courage. Join me tomorrow when we look at Luke, the way of justice.